Hi everybody, Dr. Daniel Amen. Lesson 6, the impact of drugs and alcohol on the brain. It's a really important lesson, and I'm going to tell you about my experience over the last 25 years at looking at, literally tens of thousands of brains. And one of the big lessons I learned that drugs and alcohol truly can damage the brain. But you want to understand why people use and what are some alternatives. The real reason not to use drugs is they damage your brain. And if they damage your brain, they damage your ability to be your best self. So when I started looking at the brain in 1991, I was the director of a dual diagnosis unit. So that's a psychiatric hospital unit that also takes care of drug addicts. And I'm also a child psychiatrist, so I would see kids on the child unit. I would see people who were elderly, who had memory problems. I'd see people who are depressed, bipolar disorder. But the worst scans that I had seen were the drug addict and alcoholic scans. So again, here's a healthy SPECT study. Again, SPECT looks at blood flow and activity. It looks at how the brain works. And in a healthy scan, full, even, symmetrical activity, symmetrical just means the sides look like each other. And the color doesn't matter, it's the shape that's important. And when you see the holes on the scan, people really don't have holes in their brain. What that indicates is significantly low activity, low blood flow to the brain, and it means damage to the brain. So these are a cocaine and methamphetamine brain. Now, right away, some people who have ADD, they'll go, but the stimulants we use are in a methamphetamine category, and that's true. But the dosages are way different. When we use them to treat ADD, we're often using really small doses, but when people use them in an abuse way, they often use 10 to 100 times the dose that we would use clinically. And the high doses just cause this overall decreased activity, because what they're doing is they're causing blood vessels to constrict and sometimes spasm, which means constrict and stay that way. Alcohol and heroin, and we have an epidemic in this country of opiate abuse. Heroin is considered an opiate or a pain medication, and one reason you don't want to use pain medications like opiates, if you can at all stay away from those. And marijuana. This is actually a 16-year-old boy who was smoking a lot of marijuana and had low activity in the front part of the brain and in the temporal lobes. And remember, the front part of the brain, things like focus, forethought, judgment, impulse control, organization, planning. And the temporal lobes, we haven't really talked about them as much yet, and they're involved with learning, memory, mood stability. They're very important parts of the brain. So we have a poster called Which Brain Do You Want? That hangs in about 100,000 schools around the world to healthy scans in the middle. So in the middle left, that's looking down from the top. The middle right looking up from the bottom. And these are young drug-abusing brains. And it just horrified me that we could even see the trouble in 14-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 22-year-olds who really should have the prettiest, healthiest brains during the lifespan. Why are people concerned about drug and alcohol use. It changes how your brain functions. And it's both legal and illegal drugs. It can damage your brain. And the younger you are, the worse the damage is and the longer it lasts. So remember what we've been talking about. Your brain is involved in everything you do. How you think, how you feel, how you act, how you get along with other people. It's the organ of learning, loving, and behaving. And it is undergoing wild development until you're 25 in females, 28 in males. And so if you're putting toxins in your body, it can delay your development. And when I would see drug addicts who were 28 or 30 or even 40, but they started using when they were 16 or 18, their emotional age, even at 40, was sort of still about 16 because it is damaging your development. Opiates, we talked about that, can damage the brain. Ecstasy and methamphetamine can have damage similar to brain injuries. Certain drugs of abuse can cause cell death, memory loss, learning difficulties, even strokes. A very famous basketball player many years ago, he was drafted in the top 10. He was using cocaine, had a stroke, and died. Inhalants, so inhaling organic solvents, so inhaling glue, inhaling paint thinners, inhaling gasoline. What I have seen is they're just the worst. The scans look the worst for people. It's called huffing. You don't want to do that. You want to be breathing clean air, not poison. Marijuana is a big issue, and I know there's going to be a lot of discussion about this. We're getting ready to publish a study on 1,000 marijuana users, and when we compared them to our healthy group, every area of the brain was lower in the marijuana groups. Now, I absolutely don't think people should be arrested for smoking pot. I mean, it's like, how is that helpful? I think the smarter way to go is to teach them it's really not enhancing brain development, but in fact, delaying brain development. So my experience with over 1,000 marijuana smokers is it can lower overall activity. Of course, if you use any drug before the age of 25, it's worse. It can decrease thinking, memory, learning, how happy you are, mental health, relationship issues. And what's really been horrified, and this has been done in repeated studies, it's linked to psychosis for some vulnerable teens, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. Some people think it's a gateway to other addictions. So I want you to be cautious on what you see in the media. You know, a lot of my scientific friends know my position on it, so they're always sending me articles on, you know, it's got this benefit or that benefit, and I just have to tell you, it's my experience. You know, I've been a psychiatrist, goodness, 36 years or so. It decreases blood flow to your brain. And I understand why people do it, because they feel less anxious. Sometimes they feel less depressed, but I'm not a fan. You want to be careful what you read on the internet, and the studies can be misleading. This is a 16-year-old with a 2-year history of daily abuse. You can see decreases in their frontal lobes and in their temporal lobes. So why do people begin to use drugs and alcohol? I learned early on when I was treating people had issues with drugs and alcohol, that being judgmental wasn't helpful. That what was really helpful from a treatment standpoint is being curious. And that's what I would want you to be, is if you've experimented, do they make your life better? I mean, initially you might say yes, but then you might want to get the opinion of other people, your friends, your parents, people who love and care about you. But for me, it's why. Why do people use, and are there other strategies that you can use to feel better? So some people use because it's fun, and especially teens, to fit in. Now, it's their own peer pressure. They want to fit in, so they're more likely to even ask for them. Certain drugs, especially the downers, alcohol, marijuana, opiates, decrease social anxiety. Sometimes it's modeled by parents. When I was growing up, the 60s and 70s were really the advent of a lot of drug use in the United States. Well, those people now have children, and if they're still using drugs, their kids are going to be using drugs, or at least have a higher incidence of it. There's certainly cultural aspects. It may numb emotions. So people who have raw emotions, angry, anxious, depressed, they're more likely to use. There's certainly genetic vulnerabilities. We're going to talk about that. But if you have a family history of drug and alcohol abuse, you're more vulnerable. My 4 children have significant family histories of alcoholism, and I've told all of them, if you never use, you'll never have a problem. But if you use, you might end up with a serious problem because you may like it a lot more than other people like it. People use to self-medicate things like anxiety and depression, or what I've actually seen, especially in girls, they've had emotional trauma. So PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. So people have been in a fire or in a car accident, been robbed, raped, physically, emotionally, sexually abused. Their level of anxiety is so high, and when they go to treatment programs, if no one deals with the emotional trauma, it's really hard for them to stop. And there's a very high incidence of relapse, which means they stopped, but then they started again. Head trauma is associated with drug and alcohol abuse, especially if you damage the front part of your brain. Because remember, the front part of your brain, the PFC or prefrontal cortex, forethought, judgment, impulse control, planning, empathy, learning from your mistakes. So if you damage that part of the brain, you're damaging your ability to say no, or your ability to think ahead. And there's a very high incidence of drug and alcohol abuse after head injuries because they have trouble saying no. The majority of drug and alcohol abusers started before the age of 25. You're less likely to start after that because that's when your prefrontal cortex is fully developed, telling you it's probably not a good idea, it's not going to enhance your life, it's not going to help you get into college, get the job you want, keep the job you want, get the spouse you want, keep the spouse you want. And, so it generally starts before 25 because you're not as good as seeing the consequences of your behavior. And we want you to be. It's why we had you do the exercise, the one-page miracle. What do I want? Is my behavior getting me what I want? Again, compounded by the need to fit in, to be accepted by your peers, to have friends. And as we talked about, teenagers and young adults tend to be ruled by an active limbic system. So the need to fit in without the governance or the supervision of a fully formed prefrontal cortex. I just want you to think, is this good for my brain or bad for my brain? And if it's bad for your brain, if you love yourself, I want you to stay away from it. Most teens don't use drugs or alcohol for the first time because of peer pressure. Most teens, according to a number of studies we read, ask for drugs and alcohol and volunteer to use them as a way to fit in with certain groups. Many claim that drugs and alcohol make them feel better, smarter, happier, more social, productive, and creative. I have heard that over and over again. If they're bad for me, why do I feel so good on them? My experience over decades, it's just not true. Just because something makes you feel good doesn't mean it's not hurting you. Think sugar. It makes you taste great, but it's one of the major causes of obesity, diabetes, we now know cancer, and other chronic illnesses that lead to early death. So just because it feels good doesn't mean it's good for you. So why does it make some people feel better and others worse? It's all about individual brain function. People just aren't the same. So if you have a really busy brain, like this person's scan, an overactive brain, people are typically struggling with depression and anxiety. And so they're more likely to use downers, alcohol, opiates, marijuana. They suppress brain function and may make you feel better in the short run, but because they can be addictive and cause damage, they're going to cause a lot more trouble in the long term. So we want you to find healthier ways to balance the brain. Exercise can help calm a busy brain. Meditation can calm a busy brain. Hypnosis can calm a busy brain. Certain supplements like fish oil and GABA, L-theanine from green tea, can help calm busy brains. Sometimes the brain's really low in activity, especially in the prefrontal cortex. And low prefrontal cortex goes with short attention span, distractibility, restlessness, impulse control, poor decisions, not thinking of your consequences. And so people with low activity tend to self-medicate with stimulants like caffeine or nicotine, cocaine, methamphetamines. I can't tell you the number of people who I diagnosed with ADD had tried small amounts of methamphetamines, found it helpful initially, but then it disrupted them because they ended up using too much, or it wasn't under medical supervision and became toxic. So don't do that. They may be more productive in the short run, but damaging your brain in the long run. And what are some of the natural ways to stimulate brain activity? So again, exercise can really help that. A higher protein, lower carbohydrate diet. So a diet like the paleo diet can be really helpful. Not really good for the overactive brain, but the paleo diet can be good for underactive brains. Exercise, supplements like fish oil, but higher in a compound called EPA than DHA. DHA tends to be calming, EPA more stimulating. So those are just two components of fish oil. L-theanine from green tea can also help stimulate focus, but also helps calm your emotional brain. L-tyrosine, rhodiola, ginseng can help balance these brains. our experience over a long time is drugs and alcohol can damage your brain. Here's a very interesting case that I did. His name was Joshua. He was diagnosed with ADD when he was 7 at Stanford. They put him on a stimulant, made him worse. And then they tried him on 3 other stimulants like Ritalin, Adderall, an older one called Cylard, and they just all made him worse. And so his parents took him out of treatment, and then every bad thing that happens to untreated people with ADD happened. He dropped out of school, he got in trouble with the law, got in trouble with drugs and alcohol, and it just seemed he couldn't stop drinking. And but the problem is he got violent when he drank. And on one occasion, and the judge had court-ordered him to a drug treatment program. And he was 6 months alcohol-free. And then he broke up with his girlfriend. That's a stress. Stress often triggers drug relapse. And he went and got drunk. And then he drag raced a friend down the highway in San Francisco. And he got into an accident. And he left the scene of the accident, flagged down a cab driver, and have the cab driver drive him around the city. And after about a half an hour, he took a gun out, put it to the cab driver's head, stole $25, and the next day was arrested. And as part of his trial, his defense attorney sent him to me. And when I saw him, I scanned him at rest. That's the brain at the top. You can see how busy it is. So it makes perfect sense why he's using alcohol. He's using alcohol to calm down his really busy brain. But then 2 days later, I brought him back to the clinic and I got him drunk. Just like he got drunk on the night of the crime. I actually went to the liquor store. It'd been a long time since I'd been to a liquor store. And it was a fifth of peach schnapps. I cannot imagine somebody drinking a fifth of peach schnapps. And 40 ounces of St. Ides malt liquor, so 40 ounces of beer. So I got him drunk over about a half an hour. And it's funny, because he's in chains. You know, he came to me from jail. And the police officers from jail, or the prison guards, were watching me get him drunk. And Joshua looks at me when he's getting really drunk and he said, "Dr. Amen, it's the weirdest experience of my life. My doctor's getting me drunk, and these goons, they're watching." And it was really funny. But when we got him drunk, look at what happened to his brain. The alcohol completely calmed down his brain. So you see, it's self-medication. But if you look at the outside surface of his brain, so the top scan shows when he's sober, and you can see toward the top, he's got holes there. That's the ADD part, but he has a type we call the ring of fire. When he's drunk, you can see the holes in the front get much worse, and his temporal lobes, that's the white area, the white arrow toward the bottom, it's dropping out his temporal lobes, one of the areas that can be involved in violence. So yes, his busy brain is down, he feels better, but his judgment is worse, and now he has dark, evil, violent thoughts. It's not good medicine. And I looked at Joshua and I said, you might want to let me do your medicine. I'm better at it than you are. And the scans were actually very helpful to get him the help that he needed. So why shouldn't you be using drugs and alcohol? Because it stalls your development. There's actually some evidence it can permanently delay your development. It decreases myelinization, or myelination. Remember, we talked about that. All your cells are wrapped, brain cells, with the white fatty substance called myelin that makes them work more efficiently. And drug and alcohol abuse decreases that. You don't want to do that. It can isolate you. the size of your brain is smaller. You know, I always say alcohol is not a health food. It can actually cause your brain to shrink or atrophy. It decreases your control. It can make you hate yourself because you know you're not as good as you could be. And if you're doing something illegal, it gives you that internal conflict about pushing against. And, you know, and then it becomes you hide it, you lie, you're not being as honest with people you love and care about. It may keep you from coping with your feelings. It may prevent you from really knowing yourself and your full potential. It's often associated with bad decisions, which can then make you hate yourself. And it can actually change your genes. We're going to talk about this concept called epigenetics, where your habits turn on or off certain genes and make illnesses more or less likely in your children and even your grandchildren. So there's an interesting study where if boys smoke between the ages of 10 and 12, they actually increase the risk of their children smoking and having problems with heart disease and being overweight. Your behavior ultimately is not just about you. Ultimately, it's about generations of you, which is why I want you to be thoughtful and really respect your body to feed it right and avoid putting anything toxic in it. Now, I know I've freaked some of you out because some of you have been smoking pot and drinking too much, and you're like, well, have I permanently damaged my brain? I mean, one of the biggest lessons I've learned at Amen Clinics is you're not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better. But you have to put it in a healing environment. And if you want to keep it as healthy so that it can serve you for as long as possible, stay away from drugs and alcohol. There are consequences, and you know, we've talked about these different brain systems. You know, if you hurt your prefrontal cortex from drug and alcohol abuse, focus, forethought, judgment, impulse control. If you turn on, for example, the cingulate gyrus, some drugs, especially stimulants, nicotine, caffeine, methamphetamines, cocaine can make you obsessive. They can actually make you more anxious or make you depressed, or you get anxious and depressed when you rebound them. So if you have low activity in your brain and you end up using cocaine or methamphetamines as a stimulant because they make you feel better in the short run, well, when you stop using them, often people will withdraw and get very depressed when they withdraw. If you've been using things to calm your brain down, like alcohol or marijuana, when you stop using them, your brain may not go back to the state it was before. It may overshoot it. And I know in things like alcohol withdrawal, people can have something called delirium tremens or DTs, actually have seizures, become very anxious, very agitated. There is treatment. If you have problems or you know someone who has problems, AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, has been around for a long time. It is an effective treatment. There are other self-help groups, inpatient, RX stands for treatment programs, outpatient programs, and we really want people to understand dual diagnosis and self-medication. For example, people with ADD or ADHD, short attention span, distractibility, restlessness, impulse control, tend to self-medicate with nicotine, caffeine, methamphetamines, or cocaine. People with anxiety and depression may use alcohol and marijuana. And it's important to get those things treated. So we're going to talk about those conditions coming up in a couple of lessons. If you need help staying sober, what we do is we treat any of the underlying brain problems, a healthy diet, especially to balance your blood sugar levels. If your blood sugar levels go low, which means if you go too long between eating, you're much more likely to relapse if you're trying to stay sober. So if you want to make better decisions, you have to make sure you eat healthy food 3, sometimes 4, 5 times a day just to make sure your blood sugar is good. Exercise helps, certainly giving your brain time to heal, and other brain healthy strategies that we've been talking about and we'll certainly talk about more. If you have addiction in your family or drug and alcohol abuse in your family, there are groups that you can go to like Al-Anon. That's for the family members of people who have addictions. For me, because their alcoholism runs in my children's families, in their genetic family tree, I let them know about their risk. So early on when they're young, I told them about the alcohol abuse, and I'm like, if you never drink, you're never going to have a problem. If you drink, you may have a serious problem. ACA stands for Adult Children of Alcoholics. There are 30 million people in this country who grew up in alcoholic homes, and they tend to have some lasting effects of that. Trouble trusting other people because they grew up in an untrustworthy environment. They often don't talk about what they feel because talking wasn't safe, and they're really good at blocking feelings because they're often overwhelmed by them. So they don't talk, don't trust, often don't feel. So how do you prevent addictions? That's why I'm doing this lesson. Education is really important. Modeling. You want to know who you want to be like and then spend time with them. If you want to be a drug addict, spend time around drug addicts. I mean, it's just the plain truth. We become like the people we spend time with. That's why supervision is so important. And that's why your parents, hopefully their frontal lobes are good, their PFC, prefrontal cortex is good, because their job is to supervise you until yours fully develops. I think it's critical to prevent advertising of things like smoking and alcohol to children and teenagers. And then what we get excited about, one of the big reasons we're doing this course, is to teach brain science and to teach you how to love your brain as early and often as possible. So what does this all mean? Your brain is special. Don't poison it. Be smart. Don't start. If you love your brain and love yourself, take care of it. Understanding this can help you take control of your brain and your life. Coming up, you'll learn more about other ways we hurt the brain: trauma, environmental toxins, too much caffeine, sports injuries, etc. We're also going to talk about mental health issues, just so you have a sense. So if it affects you or one of your friends, you know how to help them ask for help. We're also going to talk about diet and killing the ants, the automatic negative thoughts. Lots more to come. Stay with us.